For some people, Thanksgiving is a celebration. For others, it's a battlefield. Everyone talks about Thanksgiving like it's warm, it's golden, it's a moment. Families are gathering, traditions are unfolding, tables overflowing with food. But for some of us, that table feels less like a place to gather and more like a stage that we never agreed to stand on. Because when you're living with an eating disorder, Thanksgiving doesn't just arrive once a year. It arrives with a weight that you've been dreading for weeks. The comments, the expectations, the unspoken pressure to just be normal around food, and the noise inside your mind gets so loud you can barely hear anything else. Some people see a feast, others see a threat. Some people see a celebration, others see calculations, negotiations, escape routes. And in the middle of clinking glasses and cheerful toasts, you're trying to hold yourself together, trying to smile like you're fine, trying to hide the storm tearing through you quietly, enough that no one notices. But the truth is, you're really not alone. And that's why we're making this video. Because before the holiday season hits full force, before the table fills and the noise rises and the pressure creeps in, I want to give you something to hold on to. Tools, strategies, ways to protect yourself, ground yourself, and get through Thanksgiving and Christmas without losing yourself in the shadows that these holidays can bring. This isn't about perfection. It's about survival, support, and reminding you that you deserve to feel safe in your own body and your own environment, even on a day that tries to convince you otherwise. So, take a breath. Thank you for being here. And now, let's talk about coping skills that can help you make it through what's coming next through the holidays in 2025. Well, we are fast approaching the week of Thanksgiving, and this is a time that causes a lot of stress and chaos, especially in the minds of people who struggle with food, eating, body image, family, relationships, all those things that I talk about and we have conversations about in my counseling practice. So, what I thought I'd do this year for Thanksgiving, anyway, and possibly for Christmas, is to give you a glimpse back at some of the guests that I've talked to in previous podcasts about the holidays, food, eating, friends, and some tips and tricks to help you get through the holiday season. And maybe even some tips about talking about politics, because that's bound to come up during the dinner conversations or during the socializing activities. So check out these clips, and I hope that you have fun this holiday season. And take care, and thank you so much for listening to Calming the Chaos podcast. Well, really quick here, because this is going to be airing in the month of November, which is going to be kicking off the holiday season. And we've been talking about pie. And it's so funny because I did an interview with one of my really good friends and colleagues, Stacy Schilter Paisano. She's the site manager of the Emily program here in Olympia. And we got on the subject of pie, and there was actually a prop in the interview about pie, and why pie always comes up this time of year, I don't know. But do you have any specific tips for people who are specifically here and they're really worried about the holiday season coming up, being centered around food, being centered around family, and being with people? And yeah, do you have any go-to recommendations? And I'll kind of try and think of my own as we go as well, but just because this is going to be airing in November.
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a good one. It's one day. And what I would say is and I'm going to kind of steal Evelyn Triballi's theme, and that is satisfaction. And if you are enjoying your pie, you're not going to eat a whole pie because that doesn't feel good. So what I would do is continue to check in. How am I feeling? Am I 60% full, 70% full? Where am I at? and just staying with that pie and not being, "Should I have another one? Should I have whipped cream? There's ice cream there." If you can stay mindful, you will enjoy a piece of pie, move on with your day, read your book, watch your movie, take your walk, do your knitting, do whatever you're doing, and it does not become an obsession. Um,
Hmm.
and it is only truly one piece of pie. Your body is really smart, and it knows how to metabolize a piece of pie.
This too will digest,
Ah,
right?
I love it.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
awesome.
you know what? I usually say to people, eat as if it's a normal day and enjoy the
Mhm.
things that are. I think what came up with the interview I did with Stacy is that there's these not commonly eaten foods that are present during holidays that
Mhm.
they're novel to us. It's like, oh, we haven't had this in a year. And
Yeah.
so try and eat as normally and think of it as in terms of, I want to stabilize my blood sugar. I know
Mhm.
that people will say, oh, I'm starving up for the big day. And
Yes.
I'll even start the day before, like, I'm just not going to
Mhm.
eat. And then I'm just going to go to town. And
Yep.
it's really not good for the blood sugar that way. And my tip
Mhm.
would be just to be able to treat it as much as if it was a normal day, but with some of
Mhm.
these really kind of special foods that aren't typically going to present themselves on other days of the year. Enjoy them, like what you said, enjoy the pie. And move your body around. It's, oh my goodness. Yeah, it feels good to have motion. It feels good to have
We're designed for that.
yeah, and so treat it as much as you can as a normal day where you get to hang out with friends, family, and have some food with them, and some food that you haven't necessarily eaten in about a year. And yeah, that's my spiel for the
Good
holidays.
advice.
Yeah, so well, good. It was so great to see you here today. And, speaking of pie, my new outro actually has pie in it. So you'll be able to see that
Perfect.
as we close. Any parting thoughts that you have or tips that we could do? I mean, here's the website,
I guess what I
zestfulaging.com.
would say is you have so much to offer as a woman in midlife. You've been around the block, you've developed wisdom. There's so much for you, and the world needs your contribution. And if you're worried about having an extra piece of pie, that really gets in the way of you contributing to a world that really needs your wisdom. So
Oh,
I'll leave you with that thought.
Well, the chaos happens when you disconnect from authentic self,
mm,
right? That connection gets frayed, and that's what becomes chaotic within our psyche. So, if you can think of it as when we are born, we have two very powerful drives. One is the drive for connection and attachment, because we are mammals, we're not lizards. We don't just hatch out of an egg and go on our way. No, we have to attach to our caregivers in order to survive. However, we're also born with an equally powerful drive, and that is the drive for authenticity. That is the drive to be our true self. That is the drive to live our destiny and become who we are meant to be and go where we're meant to go. So, what happens though is that these two drives throughout our childhoods, and for some of us more than others, but certainly this happens for all of us, these two drives come into conflict. And
mm,
guess which one wins? Attachment, right? It has to. We have to survive. So what happens is it's something like this. Little kid wants a cookie, and mommy says, "No, you can't have a cookie. We're having dinner in an hour." And little kid goes, "I want a cookie. I want a cookie." And mommy says, "If you don't stop that, you're not going to get any cookies at all." So little kid goes, "Okay, I don't want a cookie." Right? So
right.
that's just like a little example of how we've all been there. We've all did it. We all have to do it. But here's the problem. When there's conflict between the two and you choose attachment because you have to, it's not a bad choice, the connection to authentic self gets frayed and even disconnected. And when that happens, it creates a tension that builds and becomes even painful. And we will do anything to try to soothe that pain or that discomfort or that chaos, if you will.
Mm.
Because when that connection to authentic self is not solid, you don't have this center core, and so you get pulled out. You're going to get pulled all over the place. However the winds blow, that's where you're going, because you're not connected to authentic self.
Yeah, I wonder if that is what's meant by that untethered soul when you are just everywhere and you're not anywhere. And that is so the disconnection or the separation from authentic self is actually what causes chaos to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah, if you
Yeah.
think of a I grew up in the Pacific. Think of a typhoon or a hurricane. It spins around, it's chaotic, but in the center, it's quiet and it's peaceful. And so the task then is to stay connected to the center. So even if you put your arm out there into that storm, you're not going to get yanked into it, right? And so the idea is that you can't get rid of the chaos. That's the nature of our world. However, there's always peace. Peace doesn't go anywhere, it's always there. So the question is then, how do you get there? And I think that's the task of our lives.
Well, and then but some people, I believe, use food to stabilize themselves.
Of course.
Using food in the way of I'm not going to use it and that stabilizes me, or I'm going to use it in a certain way, or I'm going to overuse it. But it's the use of food.
It's not just some people, it's all of us, right? We are hardwired to do this. Think of your first experience on the planet as an infant, and you're in distress. You're given either the breast or the bottle, and you go, you get to peace, right?
Mhm.
So from the very beginning, we are hardwired to use food to regulate when things are feeling too chaotic. The problem is when we don't develop other ways, so that it becomes a one trick pony. And the only way we know how to regulate ourselves is by eating or not eating. So that's when it becomes problematic. But we all do it to one degree or another.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because, yes, I was thinking in terms of disordered eating, but you're right. I mean, even my animals do it, right? I've been a pet owner for years and I've seen that happen. And yeah, we do all do it. But what you said is the problem, and I wish you'd repeat that because you worded it so eloquently. Is when we don't. You said when we don't use other skills.
Exactly. So that's what happens, is that that's the one skill we have, and we're not developing these other skills. And it's a real thing, right? It's like we just had Thanksgiving. What happens when you have that big meal and you go, oh, okay, now, right? So our bodies are designed to respond in that way, but we forget that there are other ways to get there. There are other ways to get that sense of peace and harmony. There's lots of other ways, but we are not taught that. And so we turn to, I mean, think of, for example, think of being in nature. Nature does that for us, right? That's why we go to the beach. That's why we go hiking. That's why we go for walks in the woods. That's why we go to the park. That's why we lie in the sun. It's like our bodies respond to the particular harmonic in nature. And so instinctively, we know we can feel more at peace.
I like the rule of thumb of not making appearance related comments in our lives or during the holidays because we just don't know how they're going to land.
Exactly. Saying something like, you look great, you've lost weight, or, oh my gosh, looks like you got that COVID-19. Those are in general not helpful. Even the you look great, you've lost weight comment may be interpreted as something that could be a negative, like, oh, well, I guess I have to stay this weight my whole rest of my life or else somebody won't love me. I mean, that it could
Mhm,
get that extreme in the mind of a person who struggles with food. So
mhm.
yeah, in
Right.
general, leaving those comments out of your dialogue then, is that what you're
Mhm.
saying?
Yes, absolutely. Because to your point, I think somebody that maybe has been dieting or even restricting their intake intentionally, that is complimented on weight loss, they do receive that as a compliment. They do wonder, like, oh, well, what they think of me before if I'm getting this compliment now. And if some is good, maybe more is better. And they're continuing to strive for that weight loss. And it takes their focus so much more in that direction than it needs to be. So I think it can be helpful, to avoid those comments and or give feedback or compliments based on something else, like a trait that somebody is exhibiting or a strength that you're noticing or somebody's energy level or you seem so bright or something of that nature, as opposed to a body related comment.
Yeah, and how about just like, it's so good to see you. I've missed you.
Absolutely.
I love sharing time with you, and you're so fun
Absolutely.
to be around.
Mhm. All
Yeah,
good things.
I
Yes.
was saying that about you, Stacy, right there.
Oh, thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That is a great example of how we can greet our own family members without making the body or weight related comments.
Mhm. Mhm.
And what about family and food and the comments that happen when we're, well, let's just be honest. We're not sitting at the table. We have food laid out when we walk in the door, right? And
Mhm.
so, what about the comments that people make about eating too much, eating too little, what you eat, healthy versus non-healthy, the pressure to eat when possibly we're not hungry? This is like maybe at the end of the evening when we've already had enough, or
Mhm.
judgment about our eating choices. So when we're faced with food and people at the same time, it's like, let's see, alcohol and fire equals whatever, right? Explode.
Mhm.
Yeah, could you
Right.
tell me a little bit about your experiences or what comes to mind when you think about food related comments people might make on the days of the celebrations?
Absolutely. Yeah. So what first comes to mind is people's commenting on food of their own choosing. So that might be, somebody that you're visiting or a mom or an aunt or whomever saying, "Oh, I shouldn't be eating this," or "Today's my cheat day," or any diet related messages that are made about food can be really activating and can have a person maybe judging themselves or thinking about those diet messages as opposed to just enjoying food, for what it was made for, what it was designed for, what the person making it did with it, whatever it is. Like we have that opportunity to enjoy it and take pleasure in the food that is available to us. Um, I also think that any comments or pressure, you mentioned pressure, that are made about you should eat more, or that doesn't look very balanced, or man, that's a really large plate. As somebody that dealt with an eating disorder myself, I had a person say to me once, "Wow, you can really put it away." And I'd been in recovery for years at that point, but that comment was so alarming to me and distressing because it did have me thinking like, oh gosh, am I eating too much? Should I not have plated this much? So I think any comments about somebody's own eating experience or somebody else's eating experience just isn't necessary or helpful.
This is indeed a piece of pie, and I won't tell you what kind it is until I actually dish it up. But let's just say that this pie is in its pie, not just a piece, but it is in a pie. What
Mhm.
kind of thoughts do you think could come up for somebody who struggles with food and possibly fear foods
Mhm.
around a pie, an innocent pie that's sitting there without any cuts in it, and it's just there on the table? What might some people think about that and the thoughts that go
Absolutely.
through their mind?
Yes, I definitely have some thoughts, and I just want to expand on a phrase you just used, that idea of fear foods. I think that is one thing that does make the holiday somewhat challenging, or definitely challenging, is the availability of seldom available or unique foods. And for individuals who struggle in their relationship with food, sometimes those are what we call quote unquote fear foods, foods that somebody is afraid to eat because it could activate overeating. Somebody might be afraid that it's going to cause them to gain weight. Somebody might be afraid that it will lead to other symptom use that they've used before. So there's a lot of emotional energy associated with identified foods. And I think pie or dessert in general is definitely one of those foods. So when you ask, like, what might somebody be thinking, if there's pie, a buffet of pies laid out on the counter or on the table, I think some of those initial thoughts are, am I going to be expected to eat that? Who made those? What's in them? Um, what if I overeat? What if I take a bite and I can't stop eating? What if somebody sees me eating? What are they going to think of me? There's so many different thoughts that could show up for a person just around seeing the pie, not even being expected to eat it yet, just seeing the pie, and the variety of different thoughts and judgments and fears that would show up, I think, are noteworthy.
Here we have just the innocent pie. I just want to draw everybody's perspective back to the actual truth, which is this is just a pie. The
Mhm.
pie is a trigger. And
Mhm.
yet the pie is not actually doing anything. It's what your mind is doing with the pie. All of
Yes.
those things that Stacy just said, the pie is triggering the mechanism in your mind that actually makes you think those things. And that's why we call it a trigger
The
food.
trigger. Yeah, absolutely.
So what happens if I take the pie and say I cut a piece of it, and so I'm noticing that this piece of pie is out for everybody to see, right? And yet, okay, it's out and it's cut and it's on a plate. What other kinds of thoughts do you think a person might have about it being like there and cut?
Right. So again, I think there is that wondering about the expectation. Am I going to be expected to eat that? Is that something that they're going to make me eat? If so, it appears to be apple pie. So the mind of somebody that's struggling, would be, well, apples
Mhm.
are fruit, so maybe that's better than chocolate pecan. So maybe if I am expected to eat pie, I could go with the apple because that I could make okay in my brain in some capacity because it is different or it has less sugar than chocolate. So essentially factoring in, like, what might the ingredients be? What might be the quantity of those ingredients? How might those things affect me, my overall health, my body size, all of that different stuff? Again, just so much thought. I mentioned earlier that, over 60% of the time people are thinking about, what have I eaten? What will I eat? How's my appearance? And so those thoughts are just coming to the forefront, I think, as soon as we expose any food, but particularly trigger foods like desserts or sweets. For some folks struggling, they may also think about, like, I'll just eat the inside of the pie because I'm trying to avoid grains or carbohydrates or whatever it is. But there's all kinds of calculations and figuring and thinking about going on. Again, the pie didn't do anything. It's just sitting on the table, sliced.
Exactly. Right. I think if we had a comic that we could do about like a person who doesn't struggle with food or eating, and the thought cloud would be, food, let's eat, Thanksgiving, yay. And then on the side of a person who does struggle with food would be the thought cloud filled with all of those thoughts, those
Hmm.
analyzing thoughts, those thoughts that are just a preoccupation with the food and with
Right.
eating and the effects and trying to do all the analysis. I think people would be really surprised that all that thought goes into a person who just seems to be sitting there at the table.
Right, right. I think there's so much. I think the thought cloud is a fantastic pictorial, viewing of it. And to think about it too is, it's just so much noise going on in the mind of the individual that is preoccupied with that. And so if a person is thinking about the pie and thinking about what they've already eaten, because that would show up like, oh, I already ate so much dinner, I can't possibly eat more pie, again, because of how it might affect me or what might occur as a result of that. So family members or the people spending the holiday with an individual may experience them as less present or as, distracted or wonder, what are they thinking about? Because they don't seem to be listening to me. And some of it can be some of that mental dialogue that's going on, or some of that noise that's getting in the way of their ability to engage fully.
And so that's just when the pie is sliced up and not even on your plate. But what if somebody dishes it up and says, here you go, it's yours now.
Right. And I think
Eat it.
about folks that are actively struggling in their relationship with food, and the level of overwhelm is a word you use, the level of fear, maybe even going so far as terror. I've seen people freeze in the presence of food, or have a really large breakdown, because it's just intolerable. And other folks may be able to contain those experiences, while internally panicking about this food that's being offered to them. So they might accept it gracefully, and then have difficulty with navigating, how am I going to get away with eating as little of this as possible? Or, what if I eat this piece and then I want more? So again, there's just that dialogue going on internally for a person that decreases their experience of enjoyment in the moment.
What is it that we could maybe, from this point of view, say or do with this pie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important. And this is true of people, who do struggle in their relationship with food, but also other folks that don't, that feel, fine and neutral toward food. I think one thing about holidays, or any days that are a little bit food centric, I think it is still important to attend to our own body's actual experience of fullness and hunger. And so I think having respect for individuals that might say no, like, I'm actually really full, I'm not going to have any pie, thank you. Like, I think it's completely okay to decline the offer of food if your body is expressing fullness. If your body is saying, like, I'm actually good, or maybe I'll have some later. So I think giving ourselves and other folks permission to decline, I think, is necessary, and attending to our own body's physical cues when it comes to hunger or fullness is also really necessary and relevant.
Thanks for listening to Calming the Chaos podcast. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also go to www.calmingthechaospodcast.com to listen to all Calming the Chaos podcast episodes. I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.